It began with the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound, a pale winter dawn over Brampton, Ontario. Steam drifted from factory roofs. A cold wind moved across empty parking lots. And then, doors unlocked for the last time. 3,000 workers stepped out of the Stellantis assembly plant, the one that had built the Jeep Compass for years. They knew the announcement was coming, but nothing prepares you for the moment it becomes real. Stellantis moves production to the United States. 3,000 Canadian jobs, gone. The news didn't spread, it detonated. It hit Windsor, Ottawa, London. It hit paychecks, families, and futures. Officially, the company called it a strategic relocation to Belvidere, Illinois, an attempt to dodge Trump's new 25-35% import tariffs. Unofficially, it was a blunt reminder. Politics isn't a game. It decides who gets to work and who doesn't. Within hours, Ontario's auto corridor froze. Suppliers held contracts. Trucking companies paused shipments. Economists estimated $2.7 billion in economic shock. Across local radio, one phrase cut through the static: industrial betrayal. Premier Doug Ford called it a direct hit on working families. Union leaders raged. Communities feared collapse. But Ottawa didn't scream back. It didn't threaten. It didn't beg. Because inside Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada, officials weren't panicking. They were preparing. Stellantis was bound by contracts. And contracts, unlike politics, don't bluff. Lawyers and economists tore open the 2022 Stellantis incentive deal and found Canada's hidden ace, a default by agreement clause that allowed Ottawa to demand billions in compensation if Stellantis pulled production without approved replacement. Canada suddenly had leverage, legal, quiet, devastating leverage. When reporters demanded answers, Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly said just 13 words: "Commitments to produce in Canada are mandatory for receiving Canadian subsidies." That line hit harder than any threat. It was a warning to Detroit, Tokyo, Seoul, Stuttgart, and every CEO who thought Canada was soft. If you take our money, you keep our jobs. Auto manufacturing isn't just another industry. It's Canada's second largest export, worth over $86 billion a year. It feeds hundreds of communities. It builds towns. It builds futures. And losing Stellantis could have torn a hole in Canada's supply chain big enough to swallow entire cities. But Ottawa didn't collapse. It adapted. It used law instead of noise. Contracts instead of chaos. Strategy instead of speeches. Analysts called it legal diplomacy. Others gave it a new name: the Carney Doctrine, restraint with precision. While Trump used tariffs to threaten economies, Canada used contracts to defend them. Quietly, brutally, effectively. Stellantis thought it could walk away. Instead, it walked into a trap. And as the dust settled over Brampton, a new figure stepped forward: Mark Carney. No megaphone, no chance, just a promise delivered with the calm discipline of a banker who understands both numbers and nations. His message was blunt. We don't mourn losses, we turn them into leverage. That was the birth of what insiders now call Canada's industrial counteroffensive. While Trump's tariffs rattled global supply chains, Carney saw opportunity in the aftermath. Within weeks, Ottawa rolled out the EV battery strategy, a plan not of protest but of structural architecture to rebuild Canada's industrial base from the ground up. Instead of persuading Stellantis back across the border, Canada began redrawing the map of the electric vehicle economy: lithium from Manitoba, nickel from Sudbury, cobalt from northern Quebec. Each province became a node in a strategic national grid of resilience, an ecosystem designed to supply the world's next generation of batteries. And at its heart, one mission: reduce dependence on Washington, expand trade with the EU, South Korea, and Japan. By late 2025, the numbers spoke louder than politics. Foreign investment in Canada's clean tech sector accelerated past $20 billion, with Europe's automakers signing long-term supply contracts. Economists called it a silent industrial revolution. It wasn't loud. It wasn't viral, but it was effective. While American factories struggled with tariff shocks, inflation, and labor disputes, Canadian engineers were sketching blueprints for self-sufficiency powered by policy, not outrage. And Carney's tone, though diplomatic, carried an undertone of defiance. He wasn't trying to beat the United States at its own game. He was changing the game entirely. The irony stung. A trade war meant to isolate Canada had instead pushed it to innovate. Factories were closing, yes, but something bigger was opening. a new industrial identity built on minerals, technology, and systematic resolve. The world watched in astonishment. The question wasn't whether Canada survived. It was how it turned retreat into strategy, and somewhere in Windsor, a new chapter was already being written, one that would redefine what Made in Canada really means. It rose from the ground like a miracle of steel and luminosity, a city within a city. Windsor, Ontario, 2025, the same town once written off as a casualty of global economic shifts, had become the beating heart of Canada's clean energy revolution, and at the center of it all stood one name that symbolized rebirth: NextStar Energy. Born from an unlikely partnership between Stellantis and LG Energy Solution, the project was nothing short of ambitious, a $5 billion CAD venture, roughly $4.1 billion USD, to build the largest battery plant in Canadian history. The scale stunned even industry veterans. 45 to 49.5 gigawatt hours per year, enough to power 450,000 electric vehicles annually. 8.4 million hours of construction, more than 1,000 jobs on site, and 2,300 permanent positions once operational. For a city that had seen factories shuttered and dreams exported abroad, it was more than a plant. It was redemption. Locals called it the Phoenix of Windsor. Every crane, every spark carried symbolism. Where once auto lines built gas-powered minivans, now robotic arms assembled lithium-ion modules for a decarbonized future. It wasn't just a factory. It was a declaration. Canada would no longer be the world's supplier of raw materials. It would be a producer of high-value technology. Economists compared the moment to Germany's 2015 energy accord, when Berlin shifted from coal to clean tech and triggered a decade-long export dominance. The same blueprint was now unfolding north of Detroit, but with Canadian restraint and precision. Instead of subsidies without strings, Ottawa demanded long-term commitments, local labor, and green power sourcing. Each clause read like an industrial doctrine: build it here, hire Canadians, and keep the intellectual property on shore. And the numbers backed the ambition. Projected annual output: $11 billion USD in export value within 5 years. Regional GDP growth: +2.9% from 2025 to 2028. For every job created inside the plant, 3 more would ripple through suppliers, logistics, and research labs from Toronto to Trois-Rivières. But beyond the spreadsheets was something harder to measure: confidence. After decades of being overshadowed by Detroit, Windsor was suddenly setting the benchmark. Canadian innovation was no longer defensive. It was shaping the global EV map, one battery cell at a time. So when the first production line hummed to life under that new glass roof, it wasn't just electricity running through the cables, it was a quiet surge of national confidence. And yet, as billions poured in and American officials took notice, one question lingered in every boardroom from Ottawa to Washington. Had Canada just rewritten the rules of the subsidy war, or merely ignited the first spark of an even greater economic confrontation? It began like a financial shockwave in Washington in 2023. The Inflation Reduction Act, a colossal $369 billion package, rewrote the rules of global industry. The United States wasn't just subsidizing clean energy, it was declaring an economic power race. Companies from Seoul to Stuttgart scrambled to qualify for tax credits. And at the top of the list sat Stellantis, the same automaker that had walked out of Brampton and crossed the border into Illinois. Their message to Ottawa was blunt: match Washington's money, or we move everything south. It was corporate blackmail disguised as industrial strategy. But Canada didn't flinch. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government called the move what it was: pressure economics, and responded with precision, not chaos. Within weeks, Ottawa unveiled a $15 billion CAD counter package, roughly $12.2 billion in federal incentives, $5.4 billion in provincial contributions, and an additional $1 billion earmarked for construction and infrastructure. It wasn't a mirror of the American model. It was a leaner, smarter, targeted design built around what Carney called strategic parity. In essence, Canada wasn't trying to outspend the U.S. It was outmaneuvering it. While Washington's IRA risked overheating the economy and inflating costs, Ottawa tied every dollar to domestic hiring, local sourcing, and long-term production guarantees. The result? Stellantis stayed. Jobs stayed. Supply chains held. Economists dubbed it industrial statecraft. a subsidy war fought with surgical precision. By late 2025, reports from the OECD and World Bank highlighted Canada's model as a case study in fiscal discipline. Unlike the US, where corporate subsidies triggered bidding wars among states, Canada's plan demanded accountability and delivered it. The impact was immediate. Investment confidence surged. Global automakers began seeing Canada as the anchor of North American manufacturing. Stable policy, lower volatility, predictable returns. And as Europe, Japan, and South Korea watched, they quietly replicated the playbook. The EU's Net Zero Industry Act, Japan's Green Transformation Program, even Korea's K-Battery strategy, all carried the signature of Ottawa's calculated approach. In a single fiscal stroke, Canada had turned a tariff war into a subsidy standoff and won on efficiency. Factories kept running. Inflation stayed controlled. And Windsor, once a symbol of decline, became the stage for a transformative economic model. But beneath the applause, one question burned quietly through the corridors of power in Washington and Brussels alike. If Canada can achieve industrial independence with 1/10 the budget, what does that say about everyone else? It's hard to believe this was once a city people abandoned. Windsor, Ontario, 2025. The skyline hums again. Factory roofs shimmer under the afternoon sun, and the air smells faintly of lithium and ambition. What was once the ghost corridor of Canada's auto belt has earned a new name, whispered with pride, Battery Valley. In less than 3 years, the numbers flipped. The local GDP surged 2.9% between 2025 and 2028. 2,300 direct jobs now fill the NextStar Energy Complex. Engineers, welders, lab technicians, and thousands more ripple through suppliers, construction, and logistics. It's no longer the Windsor of layoffs and lost paychecks. It's the Windsor of blueprints, test cells, and export power. The transformation didn't stop at Stellantis. New investments poured in, like DS Actimo from South Korea, announcing a $60 million USD materials plant to serve the EV ecosystem. Ottawa and Queen's Park sealed the deal with one of the most aggressive industrial packages in Canadian history. 20-year tax exemptions, 99-year land leases, and energy credits tied to renewable sourcing. To outsiders, it looked like a quiet boom. To locals, it felt like a revival. The factories that once stamped steel now assemble battery packs bound for Europe and Asia. The diners that once served midnight shifts now host corporate delegations. And across the river, Detroit, once the beating heart of the continent's auto empire, watches with uneasy nostalgia. While Detroit struggles with closures and labor strikes, Windsor's industrial graph points the other way. A mirror turned upside down. A reverse resurrection. Economists call it the Great Realignment, a sign that smart subsidies, stable governance, and green infrastructure can outlast chaotic tariffs and political noise. For every American plant shut down by volatility, a Canadian facility quietly opened under a 30-year plan. That's not luck, and that's engineering. And beneath the hum of conveyor belts, a deeper story emerges about how a community once known for unemployment rebuilt itself around innovation, law, and discipline. From crisis to confidence, from factory dust to energy storage, from forgotten town to global node. Windsor didn't just survive, it became a benchmark. But as billions in new investment pour into Battery Valley, one question now looms over North America's industrial future. Can Canada hold this lead? Or will the next shock send the current running south again? It started quietly, not with a press conference, but with a cargo ship leaving the port of Montreal under gray Atlantic skies. Inside were the first containers of Canadian-made EV batteries stamped NextStar Energy, Windsor, Ontario. Their destination, Hamburg, Germany. From there, they would power electric Volkswagens, Peugeots, and Volvos rolling across Europe. By 2025, the numbers told a story no one expected. Canadian exports to the United States had fallen 7.9%, the sharpest drop in a decade. But trade with Europe surged 23.5%, the fastest growth since 2007. A tectonic shift in direction. The message was undeniable. Canada was no longer just selling cars to America, it was selling technology to the world. Ottawa called it the clean and reliable supplier doctrine, a deliberate rebranding of Canada's role in a fractured global economy. While Washington and Beijing traded tariffs and accusations, Canada quietly built something both sides wanted, but few could match: consistency. Stable politics, stable energy, stable policy. In Brussels, policy papers began listing Canada alongside Norway and Sweden as models of industrial transparency. In Seoul and Tokyo, trade envoys negotiated long-term supply deals for Canadian lithium and solid-state battery technology. And in Berlin, where factories once relied on Chinese cathodes, Windsor's output became a strategic lifeline. Every shipment carried more than hardware; it carried a new identity. In a world jittery over supply chain risk, Canada's reliability became its currency. Its EV exports now represented not just clean technology, but trust made tangible. At home, the transformation seeped into daily life. Small towns near Sudbury and Val-d'Or saw new training centers open for battery technicians. Port cities buzzed with logistics jobs. University labs shifted from theory to invention. The old economy of extraction evolved into one of innovation: clean, measurable, scalable. And yet the success came with quiet tension. Could a nation so dependent on American trade truly pivot eastward without consequence? Would Washington see a partner or a challenger? For now, the ships keep sailing, from Windsor to Montreal, Montreal to Hamburg, each voyage a declaration that Canada had crossed an invisible line. No longer the junior partner in North America's auto empire, it had become something else entirely: a sovereign supplier of the future. But as Europe deepens its embrace and Asia begins to follow, one question lingers beneath the triumph: can Canada maintain its balance between power blocks, or has it stepped into the world's next great tug-of-war? It began with a loss and ended with a lesson. Brampton lost its factory. 3,000 jobs disappeared overnight. For a moment, it felt like the end of an era, another chapter in the long decline of North American manufacturing. But what no one saw coming was that Canada was quietly writing a new blueprint. While others reacted with anger, Ottawa responded with architecture: policy by design, not impulse. Contracts replaced slogans. Strategy replaced emotion. And in that silence, something extraordinary took shape. From the ashes of Stellantis' exit rose a continental value chain built on minerals, batteries, and intelligence. From Windsor to Sudbury, from Montreal to Saskatoon, Canada connected mines, factories, universities, and ports into one seamless ecosystem: cleaner, more predictable, more resilient than its southern neighbors. While Washington wrestled with politics and division, Ottawa stayed the course: methodical, disciplined, relentless. The results spoke louder than speeches. Exports to Europe soared 23.5%. EV investments topped $20 billion USD. Unemployment in Ontario's auto corridor hit a 10-year low, and the term Battery Valley became a symbol of reinvention. Proof that quiet determination can move nations further than noise ever could. This wasn't luck. It was policy with purpose. A reminder that industrial power isn't measured only in output, but in foresight, in the ability to turn pressure into progress. Canada didn't chase headlines, it laid foundations. Didn't mimic America's subsidies, and it refined them. Didn't fight globalization, like it reframed it, and in doing so, it achieved something few nations have managed in this century: rebuilding trust between government and workers, investors and communities, ambition and sustainability. Today, ships leave Montreal not with crude oil or raw ore, but with finished technology: batteries, software, and clean energy systems that carry a maple leaf seal of reliability. A country once dependent on other nations' industries now powers theirs. Maybe this isn't just recovery. Maybe it's rebirth. Because Canada didn't shout, it engineered. It adjusted. And maybe, just maybe, it quietly won.